I logged them as harmless in my first week on the job, and honestly, so did everyone else. My name is Velthraxis, and I work as an analyst for the Galactic Concord Xenobiology Division. My job is simple to explain, even if it took years to master. When a new species joins the wider galaxy, someone like me studies them and assigns a threat tier. Tier 1 species are dangerous. Tier 9 species are, well, not. They're the ones we file away as curiosities, interesting to study, harmless to ignore. Humans were Tier 9 the moment they showed up. It made sense at the time. They had no natural weapons, no claws, no venom, no strange biological gifts like the Skarn's regenerating limbs, or the Ethuvi's ability to sense danger before it happened. Humans were soft-skinned, short-lived, and emotional, in a way that seemed almost embarrassing to the rest of us. They cried at songs, they kept small furry animals as companions, and gave them names like family members. They wrote poetry about sunsets, as if a sunset were something rare and precious, instead of a basic result of a planet spinning around its star. I remember the jokes. Everyone made them. The Skarn ambassador once said humans were too fragile to be dangerous, too emotional to be clever. Half the room laughed. I laughed too. I even wrote it down in my notes as a fair observation, because at the time, it seemed true. Looking back now, I think about how confident I was, how sure. That confidence is the first thing I want you to understand, because it explains everything that came after. The small signs were there from the beginning. I just didn't know how to read them. Humans learned Concord trade law faster than any species we had on record. That alone should have caught my attention, but I filed it under clever, not dangerous. There's a difference between those two words, and I used to believe it mattered more than it did. Then came the negotiations. Humans lost almost every argument on paper. They agreed to unfair trade terms. They accepted smaller shares of resources. They nodded along in meetings while stronger species pushed them around. And yet, a few months later, we'd noticed that humans always ended up in a better position anyway. Their colonies grew faster than expected. Their supply routes became more efficient. Somehow, losing every argument didn't stop them from winning in the long run. I had a colleague, an Ethuvi researcher named Sanaya, who tried to warn me. She pointed out that human charity fleets, which delivered food and medicine to struggling worlds, had unusually flexible cargo holds, modular designs, the kind of design you'd use if you wanted to quickly convert supply ships into something else. I told her she was overthinking it. Humans were generous, I said. That's just how they are. She wasn't convinced. I wish I had listened. The moment everything changed happened during what we now call the Skarn War. The Skarn hegemony was not like humans. They were true predators, biologically and culturally. They had conquered a dozen weaker species before, always the same way: study the target, wait for the right moment, then strike fast and hard before anyone could organize a real defense. It worked every time. The Skarn were patient, methodical, and terrifyingly good at recognizing weakness. So when they set their sights on a human colony called Meridian Reach, nobody was surprised, least of all me. I remember sitting in the analysis center with my team, watching the sensor feeds, expecting a short and quiet end. We were preparing to log humanity's fall as a brief historical footnote, a sad but expected outcome for a species we all agreed was harmless. That is not what happened. The first thing that confused us was the technology. Skarn scouts reported human defense systems that shouldn't have existed yet, based on everything we knew about human science. Shielding that was more advanced than anything in their public records. Weapons systems that seemed to have been designed years in advance, not built in a panic. The second thing that confused us was the coordination. Human colonial militias, groups we assumed were poorly trained volunteers, moved with a kind of precision that looked less like desperation and more like something they had rehearsed for a very long time. It wasn't the chaos of people fighting for survival. It was closer to a plan being carried out exactly as intended. One by one, Skarn ships stopped responding, not destroyed in dramatic fashion, just gone quiet, disabled, removed from the fight with a kind of calm efficiency that felt almost polite, if that makes any sense. Like humans weren't trying to prove a point. They were simply finishing a task they had already prepared for. I remember staring at the screen with my team, and nobody said a word for a long time. After the war ended, faster and more one-sided than anyone predicted. The Concord scrambled to understand what had happened. That's when the truth started coming out, piece by piece. Through recovered transmissions and testimony from a Scarn officer who defected during the chaos, we began to realize that humanity's harmless reputation wasn't an accident. It was a strategy. Their public image, the jokes about their emotional nature, the friendly art and music they shared with other species, their eagerness to be studied and questioned, all of it had been carefully maintained for decades. Not because humans wanted to be mocked, but because being underestimated gave them room to grow without anyone paying too much attention. While the rest of the galaxy watched their comedians and listened to their music, human scientists were quietly building alliances behind the scenes. They traded seemingly ordinary goods that, when combined with other technology, gave them useful advantages. They positioned supply routes and outposts in regions of space nobody considered important, regions that later turned out to be perfect strategic points. Their scientific publications, the ones we all read and found charmingly behind, compared to other species, were only part of the story. The real breakthroughs stayed classified, shared only within their own government and military. What looked like slow, humble progress was actually careful selection. They let us see what they wanted us to see. I found one document, translated from an old human military file recovered during the war, that stayed with me long after I read it. It was a simple phrase, repeated across years of internal planning: let them misjudge us, let them relax. That single sentence changed how I saw every joke I had ever laughed at. The Concord called an emergency session shortly after the war ended. I attended, mostly because my research had become suddenly relevant to people who had ignored it for years. The room was full of representatives from a dozen species, many of whom had spent decades treating humans as background noise in galactic politics. Nobody was laughing this time. Humanity sent a single ambassador. Her name was Elena Voss, and I remember being struck by how ordinary she looked. No armor, no dramatic entrance, no attempt to intimidate anyone. She walked in wearing simple clothing and carrying nothing but a small data drive, and she spoke in a calm, steady voice that never once rose in volume. She didn't come to ask for anything. She came to present terms. Her proposal outlined a new role for humanity in galactic affairs, one that reflected their actual capabilities rather than the outdated Tier 9 rating we had given them years earlier. She spoke about partnership, about mutual respect, about the kind of cooperation that benefits everyone involved. Every word she said sounded reasonable. Every point she made was fair. And that, somehow, made it more unsettling than any threat could have been. I watched species who had once mocked humans sit in complete silence, calculating what this meant for their own futures. The Scarn representative, usually loud and confident, said almost nothing during the entire session. I don't think anyone in that room missed the irony. After the meeting, I stayed behind to review my old notes. Years of reports, all confidently labeling humans as harmless, sat in front of me like evidence of my own mistake. I thought about rewriting the entire file, but eventually, I realized a simple correction wouldn't be enough. Humanity didn't fit neatly into Tier 1 hostile, because they hadn't attacked anyone without reason. They fit into a category the Concord had never needed before, a species that had turned being underestimated into its greatest strength. There's a detail I keep coming back to, one that feels almost embarrassing now. During my research, I came across human children's stories, simple tales meant for their youngest generations. Many of them featured quiet, unassuming characters who were overlooked by everyone around them, only to prove far more capable than anyone expected. Stories about small creatures outsmarting larger ones. Stories about patience winning over strength. Stories about the value of waiting for the right moment instead of acting too soon. We had access to these stories for years. We read them, filed them under cultural curiosities, and moved on without a second thought. It never occurred to us that a species might tell its children the truth about itself, wrapped in gentle language that made the lesson easy to miss. I think about that a lot these days. My final report to the Concord archive wasn't dramatic. I didn't write anything filled with fear or panic. Instead, I focused on honesty. I explained that humanity's success wasn't built on secret weapons or hidden powers, but on patience, careful planning, and a deep understanding of how other species think. They didn't need to be strong in an obvious way. They only needed everyone else to believe they were weak. We didn't lose our advantage in the galaxy because humans overpowered us. We lost it because we never asked a simple question. Why had something so fragile managed to survive this long, spread this far, and thrive in every environment they encountered? If we had asked that question earlier, maybe we would have seen the truth sooner. Maybe we wouldn't have spent so many years mistaking patience for weakness, or kindness for simplicity. These days, my work has changed. I no longer study humans as a curiosity. I study them as a partner, a rival, and sometimes, quietly, as an example. Their diplomats are polite, and their scientists remain modest in public, but I no longer mistake calmness for a lack of ambition. Sometimes, late in my shift, I think back to that first week when I casually labeled them Tier 9. I think about how easy it was to make that mistake, and how difficult it has been to correct it. The galaxy learned an important lesson, even if it came far too late for comfort. Harmless is not the same as weak, and quiet is not the same as powerless. Humans understood that difference long before the rest of us did.